Hi. Cheryl, aka Dr. Cheryl Meyer. And I was going to do chapter 2, or part of chapter 2 of The New Man while I'm at the beach. Because I already did my run and now I'm just going to chill here and read. So I figured it'd be a good time. All right. There's part 1 and part 2 already. Oops. So you can listen to those if you want, or listen at 2 times speed or whatever if you want to catch up. It's probably not necessary, I don't know, but I do talk about Maurice Nicoll and his background a little. It's from the 1800s. Anyway. All right, here we go. Oh, I didn't check if I had a rock. Okay. I set up the camera, but all right. So chapter 2 is the idea of temptation in the Gospels. Now, I want to say again that I'm not saying I agree with everything Maurice Nicoll says, but you can just listen to him speak as a psychologist from that era who studied with Carl Jung and Gurdjieff and Uspensky and these people with a deep knowledge of this different school of a way of development in your inner life. And you can use it just to contrast and grow your own ideas. Anyway, I don't have to go more into that. Just use your own mind to see what resonates with you. All right. Get a little bit of, okay. As we shall study in the next chapter, the miracle of the transformation of water into wine, which in its internal or psychological meaning is about a certain definite stage reached by Jesus in his individual evolution. Approximately just before he began to teach, it may be as well to consider the temptations of Jesus and the idea of temptation in its general significance in the Gospels in this connection. Now here it is necessary to grasp clearly something that is not usually understood. What has to be grasped is that Jesus had to undergo inner growth and evolution. He was not born perfect. I mean, if you think of that passage that says he grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. So he grew in wisdom. So there's some verse to that. I don't agree with all of what Maurice Nicoll is about to say because I was listening to it in my car on the way here because I have it on a PDF and I have this PDF reader like that could just read all of this to all of us right now with Brian's lovely British voice. Hello, -- Maurice Nicoll. He's pretty good though. I like Brian's like this with me. But I'm just reading so we can look at the beach and think about it. But anyway, so we'll just go with what Maurice Nicoll's ideas are right here. So that what has to be grasped is that Jesus had to undergo inner growth and evolution. He was not born perfect. Had this been the case, he would not have suffered temptation or experienced such despair. Some religious people make a mistake in thinking that Christ had from the start such exceptional powers that anything was possible to him. But as one instance, Jesus mentions the difficulty of healing a certain form of illness and says that much prayer and fasting is necessary before it can be undertaken. Later on, we shall study some of these examples, but it can be said here that the most extraordinary view exists about the unlimited powers that Jesus had on earth. So much so that people even argue that if he were the Son of God, why did he not heal all the sickness and convert the whole world? This is the same kind of argument used by people who say that if there is a God, why are pain, illness, suffering, war, and so on allowed on earth? The whole standpoint of both arguments is wrong. The idea of the meaning of life on earth is not grasped. In fact, the central idea of the Gospels is not grasped, namely the idea of individual evolution and rebirth. The sun's coming out. It was 4:44 when that happened. It's a little high for the camera, but I'm not going to move the camera. It'll just all fall off the rock that I set it on. I'm guessing. Maybe it wouldn't. All right, so let us repeat the words used above to make the issue of this chapter as clear as possible. Jesus had to undergo inner growth and evolution. Let us start from this point. Jesus was not born perfect as a fully developed, a fully evolved man. On the contrary, he was born imperfect in order to carry out a certain long prophesied task. He had to reestablish at a critical period in human history a connection between the two levels called in the gospel earth and heaven. And this had to be done in himself, practically, so as to reopen a way for influences from a higher level of the universe of total being, which extends up through different degrees of the divine being to absolute being. Let me say that again, because there are people walking by and stuff, and so, wow. Sorry. He had to reestablish at a critical period in human history a connection between the two levels called in the Gospels earth and heaven. And this had to be done in himself practically, so as to reopen a way for influences from a higher level of the universe of total being. He has total being capitalized, which extends up through different degrees of the divine being to absolute being. Those are both capitalized. To reach mankind on earth, and so to make it possible for man to have a possibility of inner development, and also for some kind of intelligent culture to exist for a definite period or cycle of history. Oh, what is this chapter called? The temptation in the Gospels. Okay. This is hilarious. All right. Okay, so one thing I was thinking about when I was listening to that part just now on my drive over here was that, is that when I was just learning Led Zeppelin's song, Stairway to Heaven, and I didn't know until I started learning it, that there's notes in the chords that go up and they go down at the same time. So some of the notes I'm playing play up on when I'm doing the chords. And the other notes, I don't know how it happens, but it's going down. And it was really weird because it gave me this impression, maybe because it was Stairway to Heaven as the name of the song, I forgot. But it gave me the impression of like Jacob's ladder and angels going up and down the ladder, some coming down and some coming up. And it struck me again in my mind because when I do these videos, it's really weird how synchronicities will happen all day long that give me what I need to be able to comment on this or talk or just be in the right presence of mind, frame of mind for whatever I'm going to teach in the video that I'm inspired to make. I don't always know what video it is going to be, but I figured it was going to be this today. But so it went in my mind about Stairway to Heaven, about going, about and him saying just now, Christ is creating and opening here on earth and his physical being so that heaven can come down to us and earth can go back up to heaven. This guy rode by on his bicycle, an elderly man. Anyway, well, not too elderly. He smiled. That's sweet. Okay. Man, I'm tempted to go play Frisbee. That's the temptation that I was talking about. People just started playing Frisbee next to me. That's 6 feet away, right? But you're touching the Frisbee. Anyway, don't worry about that right now. Okay. So as to open a way for influences from a higher level of the universe of total being, which extends up through different degrees of the divine being to absolute being. I ought to just put that on the screen. It's up in this first paragraph if you guys want to see it. But I have the link to the PDF. Just if you need to see that. Because sometimes people are visual to see stuff like this. To reach mankind on earth, and so to make it possible for man to have a possibility of inner development, and also for some kind of intelligent culture to exist for a definite period or cycle of history. So Christ, in his coming here, in his consciousness, well, let me say something like, the Buddha had a certain development of consciousness. And so if you're around him, you're going to feel different. If you're around Bob Marley, you're going to feel the vibes of Bob Marley. Like he's got it developed in him. When you're around Christ, I know it says he grew in everything, but if he's the God-man, he had this level of consciousness that was just so loving and so present and so deep. And you just feel it when you're around these types of people. And you feel the love that they're constantly just living and giving, shedding from them. The seriousness of them, maybe? The depth, but I mean, the seriousness. Like, my friend Elliot could be serious, but he is super hilarious, funny, too. I don't know, I thought of him because some people thought he was always just like brooding or something, but he was the funniest. But I don't know if now is the time. Maybe not yet. I was thinking of this one example too when I was just jogging. Oh, shoot. No. It's okay. It's about to be 11:11. And now. All right. Hopefully it's pretty straight. All right. All right. So, of this, okay, so I was talking about the being self of Christ. So him coming on earth, even being in that consciousness, affected all the people he interacted with. And in doing that, even just that, raised the consciousness of the people on earth, because he brought a different level of consciousness to earth, just like Bob Marley made a lasting impression. In my mind, he did, not just with his music, but with his being self. As did the Buddha. As did... well, we'll talk about it later. Probably. All right, so Jesus asks himself whether faith will be... Okay, so for man to have a possibility of inner development, and also for some kind of intelligent culture to exist for a definite period or cycle of history. Of this period, Jesus asks himself whether, quote, faith will be found on earth at its culmination. Howbeit, when the Son of Man comes, shall he find faith on earth? Such are the words of Christ. And these words suggest that he doubted whether faith would be found on earth at the end of this cycle. A lot of people are saying right now a new cycle is beginning. Some people are calling it the age of Aquarius. And we were in the age of Pisces, which is the fish, like the Christian symbol of the fish for the last 2,000 years. Jesus then had to bridge the human and divine in himself, and in this way reestablish a connection between heaven and earth. He had to undergo all the difficulties of an inner evolution of the human in him, so that it became subject to the higher or divine level. He had to pass through all the stages of this evolution in himself by trial and error, until it was perfected through endless inner temptations, of which we are only given a few glimpses. And all this took place over a long period, about which we only know something of the teaching he gave during the latter part of it, which terminated in the final humiliation and so-called catastrophe of the crucifixion, and a few details of the earliest part, but nothing of the comparatively long intervening part. Here is silence. We do not know where Jesus was taught during this period, or by whom he was given directions for the final drama he had to enact, the heralding of which was given to John the Baptist, who did not know him by sight, and the ordained culmination of which is referred to by Jesus in many places in the miracle of the transformation of water into wine, in the words, he is made to say to his mother, mine hour is not yet come. He does not say mother, but woman. Yet some religious people imagine that Jesus was crucified because of Pilate. No, as it were, by chance. This view is absurd. He had to play the part allotted to him. It was pre-arranged. Well, we know he went into Egypt. And there's a good book that talks about some of that, but I'll mention that some other time. Now, in the earliest references to the development of Jesus, it is said that he advanced in wisdom and stature. Jesus advanced by stages. In Luke, it is said the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, and was filled with wisdom, and grace was upon him. And that's Luke 2:52. Luke, who never saw Jesus, also records his first words. Well, I think Luke went and talked to Mary when he was found in the temple at the age of 12 by his father and mother, after a search of 3 days. His mother is made to say, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Do you know your father and I have sought you sorrowing?" To which Jesus is made to answer, "How is it that ye sought me? Do you not know that I must be in all that belongs to my Father?" Notice that the distinction between Father on earth and Father in heaven is made. That is, between the idea of the first earthly birth and the second higher birth, which was the subject of Christ's teaching. Even at the age of 12, those who listened to him in the temple were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And this quote, "amazed at his understanding and his answers," end quote. The idea then of Jesus advancing in understanding is quite distinct, and it is clear that a long period elapsed before he had advanced to his full inner stature and attained his supreme development. Wow, if you guys knew, I just can't mention the book that I'm thinking of. But Jesus was teaching profound truths by that age, as far as my understanding goes. The idea then of Jesus advancing in understanding is quite distinct, and it is clear that a long period elapsed before he had advanced to his full inner stature and attained his supreme development, called in the Gospels the moment of his glorification. This final fulfillment of his evolution began when Judas went out into the night to betray him. That's so weird, because I just read a different book that was talking about that, but it was sort of unbelievable. But a lot of these things are, in our own minds now, because we get fixed ideas about things. We get ideas stuck in our mind that things happened a certain way, and they had to happen a certain way because we were taught it a certain way, and so it gets fixed. Some ideas are meant to be grown. Anyway, that's what we're doing right now. And expanded. So the moment of his glorification. This final fulfillment of his evolution began when Judas went out into the night to betray him, as it is called, and when Jesus said to his remaining disciples, "Now is the Son of Man glorified." But even then, it was not yet attained, for he obviously had to undergo 2 further and very severe temptations. The temptation in Gethsemane, where he prayed, "O Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass away from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." And the temptation on the cross, when he cried out, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" I read someone that said he meant, "Why have you forsaken me in all of these people, in everyone around me?" Not everyone, because Mary was still there, but John and the other Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Miriam Salome, is that who her name was? But I think she was there. But in the people around him, like, if we're all made out of the God spark, out of the substance of God, they had rejected him, we had rejected him, and forsaken the highest love. Not recognized it. That's what's the sad tragedy about this, is we didn't recognize. Let's see here. I don't know. I'll go on my knees for a little bit. Oh, like I did the other night. All right. I don't want to keep trying to protect people's identity. Well, but people are going to be on this trail. All right. We'll see. Hello. Oh, but I want you guys to see the ocean. It's so nice. We'll turn back around a little bit. So, they were amazed at his answers. Now the Son of Man is glorified. Okay. Oh, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass away from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. In the temptation of the cross, when he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Here must also be remarked that Christ began to teach some 3 years before he attained glorification. That is, before his full development. That's good to know, because I definitely am not in an enlightened state, and I'm doing my best just to wake people up here. Anyway, let us ask ourselves, how is inner evolution reached? All inner development is possible only through inner temptation. 3 temptations of Christ by the devil are mentioned in detail in the earliest parts of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and referred to briefly in Mark, in terms of, quote, wild beasts. Nothing is said of this in John, but the miracle of the water into wine is made as the starting point of the teaching in the miracles of Jesus. Oh, I forgot my hands right in front of that. Okay. Let me see if people are, you can see them on the path. Let us stand. Let us study for the present the version of the 3 early temptations that's given in Luke, in order to realize that Jesus had to advance by undergoing development by the method of temptation, and so pass through stages of inner growth by means of inner self-conquest. But let us first remember that the conception of mankind in its unawakened state, as given in the Gospels, is that it is in the power of evil, and is thus represented by the idea that man is infested by evil spirits. That is, man is under the power of evil moods and impulses and thoughts, which are personified as evil spirits. Well, some people call them elementals. Or I knew, again, a Native American shaman who said, like, thoughts are real. So it's kind of like thought forms, a culmination of a bunch of thought forms. That is, man is under the power of evil moods and impulses and thoughts, which are personified as evil spirits, whose object is the destruction of a man and of a human race. I feel like we ought to go look at nature again. All right, we'll try to do this. Okay, as evil spirits whose object is the destruction of man and of the human race. The conception of the Gospels is that man is continually being dragged down by evil forces, which are in him, not outside him, and to which he consents. By man's consent to these forces in himself, progress in human life is prevented. So they're talking about how this rebirth and this inner progress is prevented, and how you can get beyond it, actually, and start growing. The evil powers are in man and in his own nature. Sorry, there's an ant. In the very nature of his self-love, his egotism, his ignorance, his stupidity, his malice, his vanity, and also his thinking only from the senses, and taking the seen world, the outer appearances of life, as the only reality. This is a life evolution. It's from the Greece. But these defects are collectively called the devil. which is the name for the terrible power of misunderstanding everything. That's great. I hope you get to see the surfers. Are they in your field? Yeah, I think so. There. Sorry, it's a little sideways. Okay. So let me go back to that. The evil powers are in man in his own nature, in his very nature of his self-love, his egotism, his ignorance, his stupidity, his malice, his vanity, and also his thinking only from the senses and taking the seen world, the outer appearance of life, as the only reality. These defects are collectively called the devil, which is the name for the terrible power of misunderstanding everything that undeveloped man possesses, the power of wrongly connecting everything. The devil is the aggregate of all of these deficiencies, all these powers of misunderstanding in man, and all their transmitted results. So the devil is called the slanderer or scandal maker from one point of view, and the accuser from another point of view. But we shall see a little more clearly what is meant by the devil when we begin to understand what temptation really means. Now, C.S. Lewis goes and talks about how, yes, the devil would love for us to think that there is no such thing as some kind of fallen angel that's an entity. But I won't get into all of that right now. But there are the inner accuser, these parts of yourself that are very similar to what Maurice Nicoll is describing as far as what I understand. So I'll just let you keep thinking of your own life, your own understanding. Let me think. There's something that was coming up with this, but oh yeah. So Eckhart Tolle takes the word for sin, and the word for sin in Greek is hamartia, to miss the mark. It's like Jesus came here and said, "Follow me," and he has this telos, and the telos, when he says, "Follow my commandments," it's the word entele, which means telos is the Greek word for telos. So this goal out here, this let's see. There's kids. I'm just going to put this here for a second. This higher goal, like a goal of perfect love, let's say. But Eckhart Tolle, I like how he says it. His understanding is that to sin is to miss the point of all of life, to miss the mark, to miss. If you're shooting at a target and you miss that, the whole idea is to develop in your capacity to love here and your capacity to grow in your inner being. Okay, so here's where the example comes up. I'm just going to use it now because it's pressing in my psyche again. And it came up earlier because I was just trying to understand this concept that I was meditating on. And it had to relate with what Maurice Nicoll is teaching as well. I don't know, the example that came to my mind is if you have a bunch of little candles, like little thin ones, and you just burn those up every day. Like this is your daily bread, let's say, and you burn it up and you burn it up instead of melting all the wax together and making this big candle. And that, like, let's say, it's like I was being all romantic, of course, in my mind. But, I was thinking, what if your love was out at sea on a boat, and because you burned up, this is how I see Christ in a way, because you burned up all of those candles every day, just, let's say I was just going out and getting drunk, or just thinking only of myself and of, and not getting drunk like I'm making fun of that. I'm saying like, gosh, there's so many layers to this, because if I'm getting drunk because I'm staying numb in my life, because I sold myself out, because my heart was hardened. Okay, so this is the layers that I was meditating on. And usually I'm not in all these layers of my mind, but there was some passage, this is what I was meditating on earlier in the book of Luke, where Christ was saying, be aware, do not let your heart grow cold, remain passionate, stay passionate. Don't let the anxieties of this world weigh you down. And then it was talking about not going off in drunkenness and dissipation, but it's not, it's like, I was thinking, because I heard a priest saying, drunkenness or living just for your egotism or whatever is about not having gratitude for this life, not recognizing, appreciating not appreciating, you need to be thankful, not like that, not valuing, not understanding what the value of life is. Now, he wasn't talking about that per se, but I heard it that way. I heard it from a deeper meaning. And I know this guy has it in his being self, so he might have meant it somewhere in his soul self, what I'm talking about. But so if you're not knowing that we have this life and you can develop this deep consciousness and presence and this a deeper, there's just way too much. There's way too much to say. If we have more than one life, and I know a lot of people, I know the majority of the world believes we do, but the Christians in America do not think this. But the Orthodox Greeks, I asked when I was over in Greece, a lot of them believe in it, and a lot of people in India believe in it. And it's supposed that a lot of people at the time of Christ understood it just to be a normal thing, like they believed it. So you don't have to believe any of that. But if, let's say, we have different lifetimes, and each of our lifetime adds to the higher soul self of us, the inner development of that, then there's something we're meant to do here. There's something deeper that we're meant to know and become, and it adds to I was going to say adds to God. It's not like God needs anything, but each of us are unique and have our own name and our own name in God. And anyway, let's go back to the candles. Let's go back to reading the book and me not. Anyway, so the candles though, okay, so back if my love was out on a boat at sea and it's at night, and look, there's a boat out there. Let's look. Can you see that boat out there? I can't zoom in when it's facing me, but there's two boats. But let's say it's like a lighthouse, and my candle, because I didn't waste it, I could somehow, let's just say it turns into oil or something, and that can light up a big lantern that lights up the lighthouse. Okay, whatever, we'll just go with the story. Is because I didn't dissipate all of my oil, all my energy, I could, my light could help bring my love into safety, on the boat, where his boat wouldn't crash against the rocks. And so I was that's the idea that came to me, because God speaks to me in my own language, which I always, anyway, let's go with that for a second, is when you understand that your higher purpose here is to not waste this energy of yourself, but direct it in a specific way so that it can grow, so that you have this higher consciousness, like Bruce Lee did from the discipline of doing the study that he did, the spiritual study, and the discipline that he had on his body, on his body. but by being strong and he knew his craft well, his martial arts. He was an artist. Amazing. and back to Jesus saying, don't let your heart grow cold, I was thinking, what is that about? Because if my heart is, that guy looks really familiar. If my heart is cold, okay, so I was thinking, oh, I just found a layer. It's this ugly, ugly, ugly layer. Yes, of how I had betrayed myself for many years, and I didn't realize I had betrayed myself. But it's okay for me to say now, because that's, once you notice it, that's the beginning of you actually letting go of it and healing it. But I was thinking my heart had grown cold in a certain way, or numb, or else I wouldn't have sold myself out in the way that I had. And so if it's numb, and if I'm selling myself out, and I'm feeling the pain of the numbness, because we're not meant to be numb, we're meant to have love flowing through us, and the pain of selling myself out, because that hurts, even if I don't recognize it, I'm feeling it somewhere in my psyche that I am betraying myself. Then of course I want to go get drunk because I want to feel good, and I don't realize why I'm feeling bad. So in all of that, in all of those layers, I'm saying, see how I wasn't appreciating life, and I didn't realize if I stopped drinking and burning out my candle every day like that, and I'd have enough power in me, this candle in me, the sun's starting to come out again a little, this something in me that's strong enough to start changing my being and wake up this part of me that just woke up and realized I was selling myself out, so that I stopped doing that. I don't know why I'm saying this. Hopefully it resonates with one of you, some of you. I'll go back to the ocean. I think we're safe now. It's going to be sideways. I'm just going to do it sideways. Okay, so from our vanity, blah, blah, blah. So the devil is called the slanderer, scandal maker from one point of view, and the accuser from another point of view. But we shall see a little more clearly what is meant by the devil when we begin to understand what temptation really means. In the account of the tempting of Christ by the devil given in Luke, it is said that Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted of the devil. The number 40, I hope we could see the surfers. Okay, the number 40. Appears in the account of the flood, when the rain lasted for 40 days and nights. In the account, the account of the children of Israel wandering 40 years in the wilderness. And it is said of Moses that he fasted for 40 days and nights before he received the commandments written on the tablets of stone. Here in Luke, the 40 days in the wilderness are directly connected with the idea of temptation. Quote, Jesus was led by the Spirit in the wilderness during 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he did eat nothing in those days. When they were completed, he hungered. Great. They're talking about a snake right above me. I'm not worried, I guess. Like 3 feet away in the bushes. And I'm like on the rocks. Oh, good. You said it's harmless. Well, see, I said I wasn't worried. Okay. And he did eat nothing in those days, and when they were completed, he hungered. That's Luke 4. Then comes a description of the first resulting temptation of this period of temptation, which is represented in the following way. And the devil said unto him, If thou art the Son of God, command this stone that it becomes a loaf of bread. Let us take the superficial, literal, or first level of meaning. The first level of meaning is just this outer level. Christ hungered, and the devil suggests that he should transform a stone into bread. Remember what we were talking about stones last time. And Jesus answered and said unto him, It is written, man shall not live by bread alone. On the literal level, this is just as it appears, a physical temptation. Notice, however, that it is said above that Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted of the devil. If we suppose the wilderness to be a literal, physical wilderness, how is it that nothing is said about how he was being tempted all this time? One might merely say that he was starving. But in connection with inner development, We must understand by the term wilderness a state of mind. Oh, this was gutting me. Okay, in the term wilderness, a state of mind, a general inner state comparable with a literal wilderness. That is, a state where there is nothing to guide a man or a woman, where he is no longer among familiar things, and so he's in a wilderness, a state of distress and bewilderment and perplexity. This is like the last 6 months of my life, where he or she is left entirely to himself or herself as a test and does not know in which direction to go and must not go in his own direction. This itself is temptation, for all the time he is being starved of meaning. Why should a man leave the familiar and go into a wilderness? He hungers for bread, not literal bread, but the bread that we ask for in the Lord's Prayer, so wrongly translated as, quote, daily bread, namely guidance. We're asking for guidance. Transubstantial bread. That's the bread that comes from heaven, supersubstantial. The supersubstantial. That which is Jesus says, I am the manna, the bread from heaven. The manna, ma in Hebrew means what? Ma, say? What? What is that? Ma, what? Anyway, so manna means what is it? So it's the spiritual bread, this super substantial, this. So you're asking for direction, you're asking for guidance, you're asking for. Well, he'll explain it more. I like how he just says it. Prayer so wrongly translated as daily bread, namely its guidance, transubstantial bread, and the literal bread for the tomorrow. In fact, meaning for the development of our lives, not for our lives as they are today now, but as they can become. The bread necessary for our support in growing this inner consciousness, this metanoia, the theosis, the godification of yourself, the grace working in you for a metamorphosis of your nous, Anyway, so you're asking for this bread that will give you the guidance for the development of your life, so you don't miss the point. The word hamartia, which is sin, is to miss the point, to miss the mark, to miss the telos. If we don't realize that we need the big beautiful candle instead of dissipating all our little candles, which just leaves us in confusion and because you don't have enough wax to build up this presence that you need to get higher concepts, it's all burnt out. So your being state really isn't there. You don't have enough gravity in you or depth for the waters to go deep. But if we have multiple lives, then some lifetimes are meant to develop other things. So we can't judge anybody because we don't know where they are on their development. Okay, so he's talking about for the development of our lives, not for our lives as they are today, but as they can become, the bread necessary for our support in growing, the bread for successive and necessary stages of understanding. For the Lord's Prayer is a prayer about inner evolution, and the bread asked for is the bread of understanding necessary for it. In such a state, the temptation is to make bread for oneself, that is, to follow one's own ideas, one's own will, exactly as the builders of the Tower of Babel. They used bricks and slime of their own making in the place of stone and mortar, like stone from God, and mortar. They thought that they could make a new world from their own ideas. Why should one not fall back on oneself and so on life once more instead of waiting for something that seems doubtful? In Matthew, the answer of Christ to this temptation is man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. So see clearly that the devil has asked Christ to make bread by himself to ease his state. That is, not to await the word of God. The devil says, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. That is, nourish yourself by your own powers and ideas. But the mission of Christ, which began immediately after the temptations in the wilderness, was not to manufacture truth and meaning by himself, but to understand and teach the truth, with a capital T, and meaning of the Word of God, the Logos. that is, of a higher level of influences. The test was as to his own self-will and the will of a higher level. He had to do the will of, quote, God, not his own will. He had to bring the lower human level in himself under subjection to the will of the higher or divine level. It is the human level here that is under temptation, for Jesus was born of a human mother. To mistake the lower for the higher is the annihilation of a man, for then he will ascribe to himself what does not belong to him. A man will then be tempted to say, I am God, and not God is I. You know, the I and I will see you through is how Bob Marley says it. But if he says, I am God, he identifies himself with God from a lower level. This annihilates him. If he says, God is I, he surrenders his self-will and makes the will of God I in him. I had to think about this. I had to read it twice. And so he's under and must obey God. When he says God is I, you can be one with God, one with divine love, but you're surrendering yourself up to that divine will and to divine love, and becoming that vibration instead of basically maybe saying I am already God, or I am God, or I'm going to go, it's the wilderness and I'm scared of this unknown, so I'm going to make up my own ideas and go from that, instead of continuously, Gelassenheit again, that word, it's a bane of my existence. It's not. It's a German word that's like surrender. It's like what Mary did when she accepted the Christ in her womb. She accepted with love. I surrender. My soul does magnify the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. Anyway, so it's you're surrendering. Right now, Christ is not giving in the temptation of making his own way, but he's surrendering to a higher will that he can't see right now because he's in the wilderness. Like we go in the wilderness of our own psyche. Like for me to numb myself and go thinking that to get drunk all the time is going to save me from my pain is keeping me out of surrender, and it's keeping me from seeing that my pain is because I've been selling myself out in a certain way for a long time, and it's showing me that because my heart was numb. I gotta wrap this up because it's time to play my guitar before the sun goes down completely. I just felt that in me. Anyway, not because I want to play it. I just felt it. Anyway, so notice that. Okay, so if he surrenders his self-will, he makes the will of God I, and in him, and so is under and must obey God. That is a higher level. Notice that the devil is made to address Jesus in the words, "If thou art the Son of God," and so suggests that Jesus can do as he likes, as if he were at the level of God. All this was in Jesus. It took place in him. And although this temptation can be taken quite simply as one relative to overcoming the appetites, in this case, hunger, it is clear that other and far deeper meanings lie behind the literal meaning, and that they are concerned with the problems of self-love and power and violence, in which human nature is rooted. Jesus had human nature in him from the woman, his mother. This task was to transform it. This is quite obvious in the second temptation, where Christ is offered all the power over the visible world. The devil is represented as leading Christ to a, quote, high place and showing him all the kingdoms of the world in a point of time. He led him up and showed, and this is the quote, the verse right here from Luke 4, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said unto him, To thee will I give all this authority and the glory of him, for it hath been delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will give it. If thou therefore wilt worship before me, it shall be thine. This is temptation as to earthly power and the deep vanity that lies in everyone. Yes, in everyone. It is again directed to the self-love. It includes the love of the world and its possessions. The devil will give Christ the world, love of power, authority. The love of possessions represent two sides of self-love. Here the human level in Christ is represented as being subject to the most tremendous temptation conceivable in regard to worldly gain and possessive power. The temptation is described in such a way as to bring this out clearly. The whole world is presented to Jesus in a point of time, that is simultaneously. Jesus is made to answer, "It is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." That is not the world and its possession. The answer is from the same ground of understanding as given in the first temptation. There is something apart from the world and the love of possessing it. There is something else that man must possess. This higher level, both possible to man and already in a man, is the direction in which his desire for power and glory must turn. See, it's like what I was talking about, the love, this love of wanting this other person to come in safely to harbor, you know? I use my power and glory or whatever for a higher purpose than just burning out a bunch of candles and going to a disco and meeting a bunch of guys instead of my true love that's coming in on the boat. Anyway, there's nothing wrong with dancing. I really like dancing, so I'm not saying that. I'm just using this as an example. When you find that higher level, then it's a joy to do this and to let go of other things that are pulling at us, even when it's difficult. And you're like, wait a second, I kind of want to go dancing tonight. The answer is from the same ground of understanding as given in the first temptation. There is something apart from the world and the love of possessing it. There's something else that man must possess, this higher level, both possible to man and already in a man. It's this born again of water and the Spirit, which Christ talks about. In the direction in which, I just added that part, but this is the direction in which his desire for power and glory must turn. But even although a man knows and is quite certain about this direction, he can still be tempted, and even more so. Otherwise, Christ would not have been tempted in this way. His human side was still open to this temptation. It is not only the overwhelming effect of the senses and any immediate appeal to self-interest and vanity that has to be thought of here, but perhaps the far subtler ideas of being able, by worldly means and outer power and authority, to help mankind. Oh, see, you can still help mankind by becoming a king. So even my idea is limited. Because a king on earth, it's kind of like saying, if we win the lottery, I'll give it to a lot of people. Jesus could have become king like his disciples wanted him to. And thus, he had this greater, I want to serve mankind. But Christ had a higher purpose than that, I might have a completely higher purpose than bringing in the divine masculine of myself in the lighthouse. Well, I guess I need to do that too. That's part of me. To unify the divine masculine and the divine feminine, so that's something else. Anyway, so Christ had something else besides being king, but you could be tempted at that. Earthly king possessing the whole world and give them earthly rewards. They thought from the lower level about, we know that the disciples thought Jesus was going to be an earthly king, possessing the whole world and giving them earthly rewards. They thought from the lower level about higher things. They could not at first see what Jesus was talking about, namely the reaching of a higher or inner level, which has nothing to do with the lower or outer level of life. We must remember here that the path that Christ had to follow led to apparent failure in outer life and outer powerlessness, and to a death reserved only for the worst criminals. And even though when you think of Pilate talking to him, he said, "Are you a king?" And he said, "If my king were of this world, then he would be rescued out of that." He laid his own life down, but he was in fact a king. He did admit that in a certain way to Pilate. His kingdom was not of this world, and so he knew his higher kingdom. And that's when you know your higher telos, your higher goal. It keeps your purpose and keeps you burning the right candles and not wasting and dissipating your energy. But we're in a wilderness, so we don't always remember that. Remember. He had only a few ultimate followers. It looked as if everything had been useless. Certainly, we cannot expect to understand this unless we grasp the whole idea of two levels, but we shall speak more of this later on, and only say here that temptation in the real sense is about these two levels and relates to the passage from one to the other. If Jesus had been born perfect, he would have been beyond all temptation. He would not have represented the new man or the way to it. He called himself the way. I am the way for this reason. I have 2 more paragraphs. And then, anyway, part 2 is there are different ways in which we can be tempted and different ways in which we can yield to temptation. Let us speak of temptation in general. All temptation, if it is real, implies a struggle between two things in a man, each of which aims at getting control. This struggle has two forms. It is always either between what is true and what is false, or between what is good and what is bad. The whole inner drama of man's life and the result of it all, in terms of his inner development, lie in this inner struggle about what is the truth with a capital T and what is a lie, and what is good and what is bad. And actually, it is about these things that everyone is always thinking and wondering in the privacy of his mind and heart. The mind is for thinking what is true, and the heart for perceiving what is good. It's like Good Will Hunting, the movie that my friend Elliot had 5 songs in. Good will hunting, your perception of your heart, following your heart. And your mind is for thinking what is true, and the heart for perceiving what is good. Let us take the first temptation in regard to truth, with capital T. This takes place in the intellectual life of a person. Everyone holds to certain things he regards as true. Knowledge itself is not truth, for we know many things, but do not regard all of them as necessarily true, or we are indifferent to them. But out of all things we know, some we hold to be true. This is our personal truth, and it belongs to our personal intellectual life, for knowledge and truth are of the mind. Now the intellectual life of a man is nothing but what he believes to be true, and when this is assailed in any way, he feels anxiety. The more he values what he believes to be true, the more anxiety he will feel when doubt enters his mind. This is a mild state of temptation in which a man must think about what he believes and values as truth, and from it fight with his doubts. You must understand that no one can be tempted about what he does not value. It is only in connection with what he values that he can be tempted. The meaning of temptation is to strengthen all that a man values as truth. Throughout the Gospels, the idea that a man must struggle and fight in himself is apparent. The Gospels are about the inner development and evolution of a man. This demands inner struggle. That is, temptation is necessary, but people are sometimes offended at the idea that they must fight for truth and must go through temptations in regard to it. But it is necessary to fight for knowledge as much as to fight with oneself. So, when we learn to get out of our egotism and be present in the now, it's kind of like the fight goes away, because we're not, our personal egotism and all our temptations pretty much aren't there, because we've died to that. So there are ways to be in the now and be in the present and be quiet, and then it's not all this fighting. So I think that there's a higher way that Maurice Nicoll is naming, but a lot of people are stuck in this old way of the mind. And so I don't know why I was called to read the book. Let's just go with it, because it's like a transition from this way of, it's still your being state. Your being state has to be developed to a certain degree to even get to go into the now and value it. Like, I remember Eckhart Tolle saying that he was basically suicidal, and he was in such pain that he finally got to a deep state of his being, that he released all that he was struggling with and saw the truth in a certain way. I might be quoting it wrong, but it still comes from a deep state of your being, and you can do it from this way as well as other ways will bring you to this deep state of being, where you recognize your higher telos, your goal in life and love. All right, look at the rays of the sun. I don't know if you can see it. I wish you so much love. Thanks for being here.